to episode 2 of the Hardline according to Stonefruit with my man Mark French.
Good day, everybody.
And Mark and I have agreed on a format where I read an article that is at stonefruit.substack.com, and Mark or I will comment on it as the spirit moves us. So this is a recent article I posted called Ukrainian False Flags. Disinformation in the Western media masquerading as news.
Excited for it. There's a lot of things masquerading as news right now.
You said a mouthful, Brother French. We have reached a stage of technological, social, and economic development highly to a type of soft-core totalitarianism that can still somehow market itself to its people as a bastion of liberty and democracy. Conveniently for the powers that be, TPTB, it would not even occur to most people that such a thing as censorship might exist in the United States. Unfortunately, it does.
And how?
The recent extirpation of anti-war, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist voices like those of Chris Hedges, Abby Martin, and Lee Camp from YouTube proves it. The argument goes that the constituent oligarchs of big tech are private companies who can do what they want. While this may be factually correct, it is morally bankrupt. They are the most important platforms of communication and civic participation in the nation today. The modern day town hall, or like a pulpit, or as they say in London, in Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner. In areas of sensitive concern, they are, for all practical purposes, state actors to whom the First Amendment applies. To make these issues more clear to all concerned, they should be condemned and run as public utilities. They won't be, however, because then they would be unable to fulfill their primary function to the state, to work in tandem with big media and the federal government to sell whichever approved narrative, whichever oligarchy is trying to sell at the moment.
It's a fantastic opening statement. I don't think it's hyperbole to state right now that what we're supposed to be saying to each other is being forcefully handed out from what has basically become state-run media. I don't think that's flippant to say that they're working directly together. And if their ideas were so good, why would it require so much coercion? The very opening statement of the piece of the way that they're marketing themselves, I think that immediately comes into play. Chomsky has a saying, whether you agree with him or not, that's kind of irrelevant. But Chomsky says the legitimacy of any upheld order can be determined by the amount of propaganda used to uphold it. So those things that you said in this recent piece, I think are absolutely true and as plain as the nose on the end of our face. There's a great deal of censorship going on. There is an underhanded attack on free speech with complete synergy between big media, big tech, and the state of what they want put out there and what they consider to be socially acceptable speech.
I find it so strange that the so-called left was usually had a self perception of itself as being the guardian of free speech
Yeah,
and associated civil liberties, to the extent that ACLU's Pride and Joy was having defended the right of Nazis to march in Skopje, Illinois.
yeah,
And now, I mean, to rip it right out of today's headlines, you have Obama in Silicon Valley just a few days ago saying people are getting killed because of misinformation. It seems like the loudest clamor to censor is coming from the left,
absolutely.
when ironically the only anti-war voices are to be heard on Fox. To carry forward with my piece again, during the pandemic, because I see this, we just kind of stopped talking about the pandemic, but big media gave us just something new to be of. During the pandemic,
Yeah.
it was big pharma's narrative of mandatory multiple jabs, masks, social distancing, and universal lockdown. This worked well enough, especially while 75% of big media's advertising coming from big pharma.
Yeah.
Alas, many of the allegations that got people deplatformed early on turned out to be plausible at the very least, or in fact, true.
Yeah.
The lab leak hypothesis, for example, that was getting people deplatformed in the first half of 2020.
Yeah.
And I believe the second half or the first half of 2021, you had a former director of the CDC and a prominent article in the Journal of Atomic Scientists saying that, yeah, we think the lab leak is the most plausible thing. And key cheerleaders like Fauci, if I'm being charitable, I'd say that he was providing us with inconsistent messaging, or just say he was lying for us. There was an alignment of interest between the government, big pharma, and the agencies, the regulatory agencies that were all captured by big pharma,
While
as
being
pretty much
involved
agency is.
on the financial side in a way that you could at best say is a conflict of interest.
That would be so charitable, because the chairman of the industry specific committees in Congress, they'll do a few terms making low six figures as a congressman or woman, and then they'll go be lobbyists for the industry that they were writing legislation for, and start making real money, start making seven figures.
That's right.
You know, if I think there's kind of a skeleton key to the things that America needs to address before it has any hope of interacting the dozens of things it needs to do. And
Sure.
one would be to eliminate lobbying and the revolving door between Congress and lobby and K Street,
Sure.
and to overturn Citizens United, and to have publicly financed elections.
A model that might work well, at least during the interregnum and during a changeover of some significant kind, may also be the Singapore model, where they pay their public servants $750,000 a year. They pay them properly, so they don't feel the need, so they can actually be public servants and make that a viable career. We've had a large brain drain of interesting thinking, what Americans usually hold so dear, of dynamic outside the box thinking, if you will, because it's very expensive to live in a big city and maintain two households. To go back and forth from New York or San Francisco or Nebraska and Washington, they feel compelled at some point, especially with most of them being Ivy League lawyers. If we're going to change that in any meaningful way, and they're actually creating policy that once again benefits Main Street and revitalizes our rural places that are being abandoned by the drove, comes up with creative thinking to deal with these very inefficient, expensive suburban sprawl. We need a lot of creative thinking there. So if we make it a real career for a while, we won't have to worry about them having one foot out the door constantly and immediately going to Goldman Sachs as fast as possible so that they can sell off everyone's sewer and water systems to the highest bidder.
I think that's a reasonable proposal because a lot of the lucrative industries, unfortunately, like high finance, like big tech, they suck up a lot of intellectual talent. And
yes.
Congress self-selects for a very narcissistic, unintelligent type all too often. And a type that's divorced from the Main Street that you mentioned that they are sent there to serve. I don't know the exact factoid, but I think 2/3 of congresspeople are millionaires. And I think like 95% are college graduates when only about a third or 40% of Americans are even college graduates. And I think something like 2/3 are lawyers. So you have millionaire lawyers representing the average American people.
Sure.
I think Truman was the last that did not graduate from college.
I think that's probably right.
To dip back into the stonefruit.substack.com, during the pandemic, there was every yard sign said follow the science along with other woke injunctions. But for me, following the science came to require Olympian level gymnastic skills because it just kept changing. So in the pandemic, eventually the narrative just fell to pieces. The mask mandates were finally lifted and the agenda for endless jabs ran out of steam after the first or second booster. Brett Weinstein and who's his wife? The Dark Horse podcast. Do you listen to that one?
I have not recently, but I know of it, and I cannot remember her name right now.
Me neither. But they're one of my favorite podcasts, and they are in Oregon, as am I. And they noted our mask mandates lifted about a month and a half ago, and it was supposed to be, let's say, in 90 days they will lift the mask mandate, and then it was, we're going to lift them next week. You know, the narrative just fell to pieces here, and I think in a lot of municipalities or states, wherever any political body was doing the regulating, because if it was we're following the science, 90 days, no, we just get lifting it in a week. So that agenda of the pandemic ran out of steam. Fortunately for big media and the government, another oligarchy, the military-industrial complex, has a new narrative to sell us now. This has brought the ratings of legacy media back up to Trump-era levels and given the political class a new means of keeping us all divided and confused So the oligarchs and rentier class can continue to eat our very substance. The war in Ukraine. Mark, I know you're a fan of Michael Hudson, and I've been listening to him a lot lately. And what he has to say about the rentier class is, I think, highly appropriate to our present moment.
Mhm.
And if you've noticed, what's the latest thing the hedge funds are going after? What's the asset class?
Well, I mean, they caused another housing bubble. They're doing the American nightmare. It's the American dream in reverse.
Right.
They're outbidding normal and working people for single family residences to turn everyone into permanent renters, and they're trying to put a happy face on it and acting like they are alleviating Americans from the burden of home ownership, as if they have any interest in being an effective landlord.
Yeah.
And we just did this in 2008. So this time it's going to be worse. Last time it was subprime. This time it's everybody.
Everybody. And home ownership has traditionally been the primary engine of middle-class intergenerational wealth transfer.
Yes.
And they're eliminating it as quickly as they can, coming in with all cash offers or 20% over asking offer or over listed price offers.
Yeah.
And what's really bitterly ironic about it for me is in economics, you're very well versed in economics. And that's one reason I'm excited to have you as my partner in crime for the Hardline, according to Stonefruit. But the rentier class has a technical meaning in economics.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Rental extraction, whether it be housing, patents. Yeah.
Patents, exactly. It's rents construed very broadly. But in
Yes.
this exact particular case, they're going after actual rents.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes they say the quiet part out loud, and it just is what it is.
It's so macabre.
Yeah.
You know, the first time I ever heard that phrase, saying the quiet part out loud, was from another one of my favorite pairs in the podcasting world, Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty.
Mm-hmm.
Sagar and Jetty, I ever heard say the quiet part out loud, and that is a very handy phrase.
Well, he's a former White House press secretary, so if anybody knows, it's him.
Yeah. And Ryan Grimm, who took over after Crystal and Sagar jumped ship, like Glenn Greenwald jumped ship from The Intercept, and Matt Taibbi jumped ship, and Katie Halper jumped ship from Rolling Stone. Everyone's migrating to Substack. But Ryan Grimm is one of the rising as it remains with The Hill. And he too is a White House correspondent.
Yeah.
And he's not horrible, but I don't hold him in the esteem I hold in some of those other heroes. But back to the war, the present moment of war, the perma war.
Sure.
I call it wargasm.
Yeah.
It's full of cliches, which are, in my estimation, tired, wilted poems. And they survive as long as they do because they contain more than a grain of truth. Here's one. War is hell. It is always the innocent civilians who suffer the most. I don't question the moral courage and moral passion of the aid workers at the border or in country, or the humanitarian necessity of their missions. I do not question most of the refugee reports of atrocities and war crimes committed by individuals. Neither do I deny that some of these reports could be generated by quote unquote intelligence. operatives. In any event, military discipline is never perfect, and rogue soldiers and rogue units are a fact of war. So is the information war. If we are to achieve an abiding peace, which is theoretically what we all want, we must have justice. To have justice, we must have truth, which is in scarce supply for those willing to accept whichever ideology washes over them in the most satisfying manner, especially the cowardly, incurious, and I don't want to cap on everybody, those understandably rendered near comatose by the quotidian demands of making ends meet.
Yeah.
For justice to be impartial, it requires an unflinching review of the facts as a whole, no matter how unpleasant they may be, or in this case, how much they contradict the approved narrative given to us by the government, big media, big tech, and the military-industrial complex, and academia. NYU and Stanford and Harvard all have notable internet research units taking an academic look at social media and the internet in modern, quote unquote, advanced democracies or advanced post-industrial democracies. I'm on a bunch of listservs and from across the political spectrum, and I get stuff from Cato Institute.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Which is usually would sell itself as libertarian.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
they're a well-known think tank.
And yeah, you got your Heritage and American Enterprise Institute on the right. And who would you say are on the left?
There's two or three really large ones. It escapes me right now. I don't have a computer right in front of me.
Sure. I'd vote for Brookings.
Yeah, sure.
And Center for American Progress, which
sure.
is
right, kind of
I don't know if she's still there.
A bizarre
was that
world.
lady that ran it?
Nina, the terrible Clinton person.
Yeah, just one of Nima. It's an Indian, a South Asian name. God damn, what is
I don't remember.
But they, because she knows where all these, because she's such a member of Clinton world, DNC world, Neera Tanden, because she knows where all the bodies are buried. The first job they tried to give her, one of the first jobs in the Biden administration, was head of OMB.
Yeah, right.
Head of Office Management and Budget, which is
talk about saying the quiet part out loud.
Wow, I mean that position, that office represents the executive in Congress, and every aspect of the president's legislative agenda flows through OMB.
Yeah.
But she was too partisan even for the Congress to approve.
Well, it's even worse than that. She was a Twitter bully. they couldn't make her Twitter bullying go away.
Even though she tried by deleting it was over several thousand tweets.
Yeah, sure.
When she was running and gunning to be named OMB head.
But I mean, it's just it's a microcosm and apropos of the current climate. The right just gets to paint her as a radical Marxist communist, and then whereas the polite society left says, well, she was a meanie on Twitter, we can't have bullies. So she gets attacked from both sides.
And no one attacks her as a DNC
on her actual policy.
Clinton world apparatchik.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The things that she would actually do to ruin most Americans' lives, no one talks about that.
swinging back to Cato Institute. So
Yeah,
if we agree that they're libertarian, I
yeah,
think that the best thing you can say, well, libertarians, there's a few good things you could say, but one of them is that they're strong on free speech.
should be theoretically.
Should be. Free speech and
There's
civil
there's no
liberties.
there's no Tea Party movement right now to free Assange and Snowden.
Hell no, there isn't. And Assange is about to be extradited to
Mhm.
America. And
Yeah,
that certainly is not on the legacy media or the mainstream media.
yeah.
But I saw a email to me about a upcoming Cato Institute webinar on how to combat disinformation in the media.
Hmm.
And because I have an education background and a lot of the things that come to me come from that world, it was a
Sure.
professional development for teachers to combat disinformation in news classroom. And who were going to be their experts? Someone from NYU and Stanford's individual units of internet research and social media research.
Hmm.
And I took a quick peek at those two research units at those two illustrious universities.
Yeah,
And it's just regurgitating the same shit you see on CNN and MSNBC.
sure.
When, I have a piled higher and deeper, a PhD. Aspiration of academia is that we are impartial observers of all the data and dispassionate seekers of truth. When those two research units that are going to teach teachers how to spot disinformation for Cato Institute,
Right.
just peddling the mainstream media's line.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to take it back a little bit further, it's not an accident that Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, right? You're talking about Berkeley and Stanford and everyone in that area operating at a high level that's basically been doing this since the 60s. A lot of them were absorbed back into the government or came from the government directly. I mean, with the World Wide Web being a military construct in its origination, and those guys then continuing their careers within academia or proximate to it, I don't think it's an accident that these kind of synergies still exist, and in some cases get exemplified and perpetuated and blown up a little bit.
I agree. I think the higher you go up the prestige pyramid of academia, the more they serve as ideological snipers of the consensus reality.
Well,
And
no
I
one
think,
wants to get vilified at the end of their career, right? I mean, just on
yeah,
a practical level, even if your work you were strongly, authentically convicted to, you don't want that trash at the end of your career. You don't, I mean, you don't want to be an outcast. You don't want to end up broke or affect your family's personal fortunes in any way. I mean, I think there is a large socioeconomic and financial risk to truth telling in these environments. And I think that's
yeah,
dangerous. You're talking about a self-imposed McCarthyite vilification and ejection of independent, reasonable thought. You're talking about self-imposed censorship because you know what could potentially lies around the corner if you start speaking out about some of these things.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's a link to, towards the end of my stonefruit.substack.com Ukrainian false flags piece, I linked to an article from the co-director of the NYU Internet Research Group.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying, oh, all this misinformation is poisoning the reporting about the Russia Ukraine war. And But advantages of social media and digital news today is that we can correct everything in real time. And I'm looking at all his links in there to CBS, ABC, CNN,
Right.
the prime purveyors of bullshit.
Yeah, sure.
And I think it's fair for us to pick on these two institutions, Berkeley and Stanford, a little bit longer.
Sure.
And my bachelor's is actually from UC Berkeley.
Okay.
So of course us bears all look at Stanford as the Cal of the South Bay.
Right. Sure.
And even though I have 2 masters and a PhD, they're both from the University of Hawaii.
Mhm.
So even in academia, I think I get more respect for a bachelor's from Berkeley.
Sure.
But people say, "Oh, wow, you went to Berkeley, so activist, right?" No, all of those old hippies are trying to find the best chèvre, the best goat cheese now, and finding out a reliable Volvo and Subaru mechanics, and who has the best gourmet pizza? Of course, it's Cheese Board in Berkeley.
Mhm.
We all know that. But you're right. Berkeley, in particular, has Livermore Lab, Lawrence Livermore Lab, which
Yeah,
has been absolutely central to America's nuclear program since World War II.
sure.
And all the activism has fled to Santa Cruz or UC Davis. But Stanford certainly has Silicon Valley and has an incredibly strong hand in big tech and the internet world, which is why San Francisco's rents are the highest in the country. I think it's 3,800 for a medium 1-bedroom apartment.
And has been since the last big internet investment. So it's been right around 20 years. They didn't take long to double down on the .com bubble bust at the end of the 90s and into the early 2000s.
Yes, and to willingly be for big tech and allied institutions of higher learning like Stanford, for
Mhm.
big tech to be a willing and integral partner with quote unquote intelligence and the DNC corporatist Dems.
Yeah,
I mean, who's their representative in Congress? I
Pelosi.
have 2 in mind. Right. I don't know exactly where her district ends, but I think it's goes south of South San
It's
Francisco
it's
and
San Francisco proper, and yeah, mhm.
I think a bit further south. So I think it picks up a
Yeah,
little bit of northern Silicon Valley, perhaps,
I
and
agree completely. Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah,
and South Bay, San
South
Jose,
Bay.
and
Mhm.
most of Silicon Valley, and I think all of Stanford is Ro Khanna.
Yeah. Oh, got it. Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So Ro Khanna is often called a progressive, but
Which
he's
has become a joke.
more and more so because I think he was a few years ago, but now that people are starting to whisper presidential aspirations, tweets that are not pro. Here's 3 things I've always thought you need to be credible as a presidential candidate: for the perma war, for corporate rule led by Wall Street, and to allow Israel whatever it wants to do.
Yeah.
So progressives usually say that they are not for those 3 things, and now Ro Khanna has been deleting all of his tweets that were, say, anti-war and corporate accountability and such. But ripping on the squad and the squad adjacent people is perhaps for another broadcast, Brother French.
Yeah, that could go on for months, right?
So to do any less would be intellectually dishonest and in the long run of no use to us as we try to prepare ourselves for the disillusion of the nation state system created by the Peace of Westphalia nearly 4 centuries ago, and the slow collapse of complex contemporary society. I think that's why we need to seek truth and to see through the approved narratives, because if we continue to accept the pre-approved narratives in media, we're not going to be equipped for these really macro changes that are coming down in our lifetimes.
Well, I have a natural interest in these topics because as a humanist and an empathetic person, I'm interested in and care about the human condition, right?
Broadly speaking.
Yes. So, but at the same time, I have other things that I'd rather be doing and paying attention to than taking stock of what these morons are up to on a daily basis and talking about it all the time.
Yeah.
But it's become so dangerous and it's become so pervasive. It gets to the point where, in my middle age, I know I'm on borrowed time. I could croak at any time. At the same time, I feel compelled at this point to leave my story of it. It's gotten to the point where it needs to be discussed. If we are a democracy, and ideally we could be and should be a participatory democracy, what is more important than us coming together and beginning to address some of these things? So just being able to absorb things with your 5 senses, that's fine and dandy. But for us to be going through our own culture and society in real time, in a contemporary manner right now, we can't act like this is the first time this has ever happened before either. I mean, we see the same things playing out over and over and over again. The United States is only 260-ish years old or whatever at this point. I mean, it hasn't been a long time. Even since World War One and World War Two, and then all the Indo-Asian engagements, all of our fuckery in Cambodia and Vietnam, and I mean, there's a pattern developing. It's important to talk about Ukraine right now, and I would like to give the public writ large a giant thank you. The emotion and attention that's being given to it, I think, is important. If people were paying attention to Afghanistan and Iraq at the same level they are now paying attention to the Ukrainian, NATO, Russian, European, Asian, what's this going to look like? How would that have lasted 18 or 19 years? I mean, Afghanistan just went on long enough. People that initially served in Afghanistan could have had a child also blown up and killed in Afghanistan. We've completely destroyed Iraq forever and ever. And the only way it could reasonably be put back together again in any meaningful way is to purposely bust it up or give it to Iran. I mean, what they were supposedly trying to prevent. Iran could do a much better job than we've done with it. And then you still have a very strange situation to deal with. No one wants to give the Kurds in the north access to all that money and oil. So I appreciate people tremendously for discussing the Russian and Ukrainian engagement. I think it's very important. I hope we continue to do that in a meaningful way. And as we all come together to unspin this thing and really try and make sense of it, my request to everyone would be, if we can figure out how to talk about this in a meaningful way together right now, let's hit the rewind button a little bit and apply the same level of care and attention and unspinning some of these things to the millions of people that are already dead and the trillions of dollars already spent, because that was done in our name. All of these engagements, all of these weapons transfers, all of these financial transfers are basically speaking for us to the rest of the world. And American hard power is nothing without American soft power. We used to be Spam and Cheese Whiz and burgers and roller skates and hot rods, and it was all fine and good when everybody was listening to rock and roll and wanted a hot rod and some Levi's jeans. That's not the case anymore. Your jeans are made in China. Like, hot rods aren't doing anybody any good with gas prices this high. Like, the new thing needs to be beginning to be presented in a meaningful way to everyone else, so the entire planet Earth doesn't think we're all just a bunch of psychotic mass murderers that wants to steal all your public goods at the behest of Goldman Sachs. And if you're not willing to do it voluntarily, we're probably going to drone strike your wedding. I don't think that's healthy.
Will drone strike your wedding even if you are a American contractor? Like that parting gift the American military gave that family in Afghanistan.
Sure.
Where it was a family that was, the patriarch was working for the American occupiers. Yes. And that's the only time I ever heard it apologized for in the media. And that was because it was an awkward moment because the Biden administration was just coming into power.
Yeah, that's right.
I see myself as a triage intellectual, and I think that I invented the term, and I take it from triage medicine, where you look at your patients or the field of battle or the whatever it is, and say, these people cannot be helped. People can be helped, but it can wait, and these people need attention now, and these people are fine, and you separate them all out very, very quickly, and that's why I share your thank you to the media for at least paying attention to Ukraine, but because as we keep in the back of our mind the macro historical elements like the collapse of complex civilization, like the decline of the nation state, I think that there's three components that bear the most scrutiny for us as triage intellectuals to come galloping towards, like looky-loos at a train wreck, a car crash, and that is geopolitics, environmental devastation,
degradation,
and macrostructural economics.
Yeah.
And if we just keep our eye on those three fields, it kind of provides us with a skeleton key to understanding contemporary media coverage, contemporary politics across the globe. And from the American perspective, I'm the legendary comedian George Carlin said, when you're born in America, when you're born today, you're born into the freak show. And when you're born in America, you got front row seats.
Yeah, right. Sure.
And another good temporal marker that I like to look, well, here's two. The Anthropocene, which is usually called coincident with perhaps the Industrial Revolution, last 200, 250 years.
Yes.
It's the time that when man's impact on the planet just went through the roof and all the population charts just go exponential like that.
Sure.
And we had another exponential rise in the 50s, the Great Acceleration, when it was. Yeah, perhaps could you expound on the Great Acceleration a bit?
I can't actually. It's when you say that, the only thing that comes to mind is the baby boomers are called the boomers for for a reason. That was the boom.
That's
So
typically when the Great
when
Acceleration is marked.
it coincides, yeah, that's right. So
Yeah, just
when
a few years after World War II, and
the
it's
few years
characterized by by increase of
explosion,
use
air
synthetic
travel, freeway
synthetic
systems,
synthetic chemicals, large dams,
monoculture. Yeah, you're talking about the
mining.
birth of Monsanto. Yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
the Industrial Revolution is surely a key starting point, a key marker, but the Great
Mhm.
Acceleration in the early 50s is yet another one.
Yes,
And that's why the boomers thought, well, this is going to go on forever.
forever.
But
The
I think
party's going to
Gen
go
X,
for, yeah, right.
yeah, and that's the ideology that has suffused American society since then. But I think Gen X and
Yeah.
younger are very clear that it's not going to go on forever, and the bill is coming due
Well,
now.
and even if it continues in its current iteration, and people don't want to admit this, but it was encased by the two greatest American liberals of this lifetime, the two the two double-term people, the Clinton family, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. None of this was unspun. There was no alternative idea. And I think overall, that is what we will be left to deal with over this next 20 to 50 years in a meaningful way, is the encasement of the Chicago School and Milton Friedman and Merrill Lynch and Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and Western banking, putting all of this stuff into practice in a meaningful way, and then having Clinton and Obama with nothing other to offer, just a softer, slicker, more hypocritical version of it. It was all of the identity and social inclusivity, as if African Americans and Hispanics and trans and gay and LGBTQ, as long as they have equal access to Amazon, we're all going to be fine. If everybody can just buy the stuff, then it should be okay. And what is anybody complaining about? So it does not address deindustrialization in a meaningful way. As people get forced into cities because there's no meaningful way for them to make a living in our country's rural areas, it inflames the culture war. I'm from a big city, but if I was born in Kansas or Nebraska or Missouri or somewhere that was nothing but corn, I would want that to be okay if I felt like staying there. But what am I supposed to do if my family farm gets taken and turned into this giant monoculture conglomerate, or I get absorbed by Smithfield and now I have to be a giant pig farm, or I have to go be a greeter at Walmart the rest of my life? Like, these aren't viable ways to treat people with respect. These are our friends and neighbors. So even if you're someone that makes $250,000 as a couple, and you live in a big fancy city and you drive whatever you want and you're doing okay, you have to be able to look around the corner from your PCC or Whole Foods and see that there are other things happening in your community, and they're probably less than 45 minutes away from you.
I think you put your finger on the right place in the timeline. Iconic conservatives is not the right words because they're like free market Jacobins,
Right.
like Thatcher and Reagan.
Yeah.
It's not free market. It's the most unfree market. It's using the
Right.
government to privatize the benefits and socialists,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
they wreaked havoc upon both of their nations. But the democratic response from the exact people you name, like Bill Clinton, and especially ideologically, the ideological foundation from which Bill Clinton sprung, the Democratic Leadership Council, of which Al Gore was an integral member.
Sure.
The only way they chose to react to Reaganite economics and Chicago School economics and Milton Friedman and all of the uncles of
Hayek
von
and
Hayek
yeah,
and all of
von
those
Mises. Yeah.
the Montpellier economists
Yeah.
was to say we don't want to change any of that economically or ideologically. We just want to achieve fundraising parity with
Hmm.
the Republicans.
Yeah.
And so that made the Democratic Party in the late 80s and early 90s embrace neoliberalism wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And they did achieve fundraising
Really
parity
quickly.
to the Republicans,
Hmm.
but at the expense of, and Thomas Frank points this out in his works, his most recent one, The People Know, A History of Populism, that the deal with the devil for the Democrats to achieve this was to abandon their traditional constituencies of labor and labor primarily, really, and to abandon
Yeah.
labor.
Well, and then it becomes blatantly obvious too how and why they became the party of Wall Street. Wall Street has no ideology other than more money. They want to sell the most stuff. So they can't blatantly, publicly exclude anyone from the products, from the financials, and the derivatives that they're trying to create off of it. They need every single customer they can get their hands on. So they don't care if money is gay or trans or African American or Hispanic, or it's all money to them is money. So they can't overtly exclude anyone. How so much of the mainstream Republican Party has become so overtly tied to the big southern city evangelical movement.
Yeah, I think we could really do a long litany of the heinous bills that came out of Bill Clinton's administration. The crime bill,
Oh, it's
which
terrible.
which Biden was absolutely instrumental for, and everyone says lay off of Hunter and his drug use. Normally, yeah, sure, I
Sure.
would, but not in your case because you wrote the crime bill. But as bad as that one is, there's more. Wait, there's more. Offer not good in Tennessee. No, there's other bills
Yeah, but wait, there's more. Yeah.
like the
Well,
telecommunications.
Glass-Steagall
That's where I was going.
Glass-Steagall was a big one because that ended up, yeah,
Glass-Steagall, which
that ended up exploding the subprime. That was really the birth of '08 was, and that's also, if people go back to the actual initial Clinton campaign, he blatantly lied about NAFTA during the campaign. The guy was literally elected because he said NAFTA's terrible and I'm not going to kick any of you guys off the assembly line. You're going to keep your jobs. They're not going anywhere. And it's within 60 days of taking office, he said, look, I've been a little bit folksy and naive. We are going to go ahead and outsource a bunch of this stuff to Canada. and Mexico. And then the other thing that people don't like to admit, all of the Rust Belt towns, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Detroit, some of the smaller towns in Ohio, over
Cleveland,
to
Akron.
Appalachia. Yeah, a lot of that stuff was originally outsourced down south. It was Mississippi, it was Tennessee, it was Texas, it was all these right to work states that, like a vacuum, sucked away 100-year-old industries.
Good union jobs.
Through underhanded tax incentives and things of that nature. So why would all of us be at war with each other to keep the jobs that we already have? It doesn't make any sense. But Clinton's big lie was, I feel safe exporting all this stuff to Mexico and Canada, and then normalizing and letting China into the WTO. Because we're just going to train all of you to be software engineers or bean counters. Instead of being on the line, you're going to be able to put a tie on now like everybody else, and around we go. We're going to retrain you to do something way cooler. Well, the retraining never came. They exploded the cost to go to school. They didn't let anybody go to school. There was no retraining. There was just, you don't work in an assembly line anymore. Now you have to go work at Walmart. And that was it. So the only reason they got away with that for so long is with easy credit and the deregulation of Glass-Steagall, everybody saw their value of their house going up. So New York was salivating to let them treat it like a piggy bank and pull out their equity, remortgage their house. They could maintain the same standard of living. They could still send their kids to school. They could still take a summer vacation. They could still have a couple of cars, even though they had to retire early. Early buyouts, where I'm from in Detroit, was a really big deal. Those guys were, given lump sums of 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 grand, whatever their seniority equaled, to walk away from what turned out to be $250,000, $300,000. They were like, look, we're going to ask you anyway. Just go ahead, do the right thing, take this haircut. We'll give you your benefits for a little while. We're going to give you 50 or 60 or 70 grand to walk. You're going to get cut anyway. And we're going to turn all these positions into temporary positions. And away you go. And that's the only way the Clintons were allowed to get away with that for so long. Everybody's house's values were going up so much. And all the big New York firms were salivating to issue mortgages against that again, just because they knew those people were going to have to file bankruptcy later, because there was going to be no way to pay those notes, and they were going to be able to reabsorb all those single family residences for pennies on the dollar. And that happened. I mean, no one needs to know what percentage of the population lives in the northeast of the country. There's a lot of people from New York to Chicago, and from Detroit down to Tennessee. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, and the repeal of Glass-Steagall tore down the firewall between the highly speculative investment bank side and the more conservative retail bank side. And Clinton's Telecommunications Act is responsible for the incredible consolidation of big media that we have today, which makes it so much easier for them to try and sell these pre-approved narratives that any responsible humanistic public intellectual is trying to identify and fight back against now. And NAFTA was certainly the seminal piece of legislation, absolutely definitively destroying labor. Although Christian Smalls might be part of the entering speartip bringing it back, but NAFTA already, it also definitively deindustrialized America. And all of that initially went to China, but China has moved up the value chain of manufacturing very quickly. And whereas 25 years ago, they were making just plastic, injection molded plastics,
Yeah, that's right.
and
Yeah.
now they're making
All of
Shenzhen
our
is like
kids.
Shenzhen north of Hong Kong is like a gigantic 10 million person makery where
Yeah, that's right.
you can prototype the most advanced robotics or anything high tech in
Hmm.
something that would take a 9-month prototyping timeline in any Western country. You can do it there in 3 months.
Yeah.
So the way China has moved up the value chain of manufacturing, the way America has just abandoned all pretense of manufacturing, so that now it's planes that don't fly, some
Yeah.
cars, and
Right.
weapons.
Yeah.
And we got as far as Obama on the inflated real estate prices, but now that means that the entire American economy is centered around the fire sector, finance,
Hmm.
insurance, and real estate.
Yeah, that's right.
So America is a completely imaginary economy.
Yeah.
And that's why it has concentrated so much power into the heads and the high finance uh, sector of the economy. When you combine the concentration of power and wealth in high finance with the concentration in big tech and big media, when people want to control stuff, I'd say it makes phone calls to make to set the wheels in motion, but it's not by phone calls. Even though I'm a proud conspiracy theorist, I don't think it's by overt decisions. It's by having all grown up in this, or gone to the same elite universities, having ideologies that they share in common, and just unspoken incentive structures for their career paths. So when we get to the Obama administration in 2008, then we have the collapse. And I don't know the exact factoid, but I think it's something around 10 million people were put out of their homes, or maybe it was 10 million households.
I thought it was 30 million people and 10 or 15 million households. I mean, there's just video after video of people, entire families being literally pulled out by local sheriff's departments and their stuff like put on the curb and being like, take it somewhere if you want to, or it's just going to get thrown away. Like,
And that leads someone like Cornel West to lambaste Obama as blacker faces in higher places.
yeah,
And that, okay, on one respect, it's a triumph to have an African American president who went to the high school that I went to until they kicked me out because I was a free thinker.
mm-hmm.
But he could have, he had the wind in his sails. He had a mandate. Thomas Franks speaks very poignantly about what he could have done in the banking crisis in 2008. And the bankers are pictured going into the meeting with Obama like they're about to get taken out behind the woodshed. And instead, Geithner and Obama said, "We're the only thing between you and the pitchforks."
Yeah. Well, and then not just Geithner, what you just said is so relevant because the revolving door between New York and Washington has been so blatant and overt for so long. We can't leave Paulson and Bernanke out of this.
No, we certainly can't. Well, Federal Reserve, private bank, or government agency?
Right.
That
Yeah.
is a one for another
Sure.
episode.
Yeah.
But on track with our format. We'll jump back to the
Ukraine. Yeah, your piece.
the
Yeah,
Ukraine
absolutely.
and what the shenanigans we're involved with over there.
Absolutely.
To jump back to stonefruit.substack.com, there's a few key facts that, even though they're so basic and obvious to people like the not touching with a 10-foot pole. There's
Sure.
no way to deny the role of the CIA and the National Endowment for the Democracy, which is just a CIA cutout. And organizations like George Soros's Open Society and the Azov Battalion, who are often called neo-Nazis. They're not neo-Nazis, they're Nazi-Nazis. They revere step to collaborating head of state, and the role of the Ukrainian oligarchs in the 2014 Maidan revolution, quote unquote. So Ukraine is being sold as a bastion and liberty, but
Right.
it's been
Sure.
around for these social forces for it before Maidan, say since Maidan, for the last
yeah, sure,
8 years at a bare minimum. And no one talks about the role of the existence of missile sites at an inland U.S. naval base in Poland, naval base on land in Poland, 100 miles from the Russian border, nuclear capable,
and a bunch of creepy biolabs.
Right, which I don't know how this happens, Mark, but they're called conspiracy theories by Snopes and the fact checker. When Assistant Secretary of State Valerie Nuland admitted to their existence in sworn testimony before the Senate a month ago,
while calling their citizens Ukrainians. Yeah,
it's called a conspiracy theory when someone responsible for Ukrainian policy at the State Department admitted that they exist. And those missile bases in Poland and Romania, they're nuclear capable. And as usual, since America deindustrialized, hypersonic missiles yet. China and Russia do. Russia made a point of using one during this war to say, look, guys, we got them. And when America gets them, it won't be more than a year or two. They can put hypersonic missiles in Poland and Romania, where they have sites now. And part of the ambition was to put them in Ukraine. And there's a YouTube of Putin uncharacteristically losing his cool, where he said, look, guys, the West, we've been telling you for 20 years, this is our red line. You are going to be able to strike Moscow within 5 or 6 minutes. In what world is that acceptable?
They could just do it in Cuba again. Right.
Right. And
this only goes one way.
No one's bringing up the parallels with the Cuban Missile Crisis, even though it's pretty obvious.
Sure.
No one's bringing up the fact that Russia has been invaded by Napoleon and the German Kaiser and Hitler. It's touchy about its near abroad. It's understandable. No one brings up the fact Nazi Azov Battalion burnt alive dozens of people in Odessa right after Maidan. Over 14,000 people in the Donbass. And, it strikes me as very interesting that two of these so-called Russian atrocities are in the Donbass, the places that the Ukrainian military has been killing Ukrainians since Maidan in 2014. No one talks about the outsized influence that Azov has in politics and war. Every country's got Nazis. Well, they're not always number 2, number 3, number 4. And they have threatened Zelensky's life if he makes peace. So in spite of only being 10% Ukrainian military, they have this disproportionate influence. These missiles, they're mine, nuclear capable, not yet hypersonic, but likely to be in a year or so. China and Russia already have them. Do you remember what Russia Ukrainian missile depot, a munitions facility on March 21st?
So of course, if it gets hit by
So to
any
say
tiny
that,
thing, it's going to blow.
so to say that neo-Nazis is misleading. To never bring up any of these other factors in the media portrayal. To not mention that they started out as Azov started out as a militia, and that they were formally integrated into the Ukrainian military in 2014, and that their sympathizers are direct evidence of a powerful, important fact in Ukrainian politics. And post-orthodoxy, Dark and Ainsley made a point of taking a look at Fire and Ukraine on Fire. Winter on Fire is more pro-West, pro-Ukrainian, and no one's denying that the guy that got ousted unconstitutionally in 2014, what was his name again? Yalansky?
Oh no, Petrovsky was the original. I don't remember.
Me neither.
It escapes me right now.
He was corrupt, but he was constitutionally, and
yeah.
So the guy that, you know what? Why does no one notice that Azov has SS in their logo? No one seems to notice that.
Right.
It looks just like
Or
SS.
care.
Yeah. So Russia has good historical reasons to be touchy about its near abroad. It has good reasons to be touchy about Nazis, having lost 25 million people in World War II, about half of their population at the time.
Yeah.
But all of that is glossed over. So also need to mention that in 2010, Russia and Ukraine ratified a treaty granting the Russian Navy use of Sevastopol on the Crimea through 2042. Ukraine was to continue being a geopolitical playground for neoconservative ideologues. And Valerie's husband is Robert Kagan, one of the grandfathers of the neocons. And we all remember how important the Project for a New American Century was to Bush. So these neocons want to live out their final fantasies while it's still remotely even able to be to the American public of unilateral American hegemony. But if they'd succeeded in that, Russia would have lost their only access to their only warm water naval base. And obviously this was not going to happen during the rule of an authoritarian who places a supreme Russian state pride and power. So Putin took back Crimea, which had been Russian.
And just on a logistical level, on a logistical level, they have to have a land bridge to Crimea through the Lugansk and the Donetsk, and that's where Russian-speaking people have already been being ostracized and attacked for 8 or 9 years. This could end immediately.
Murder.
Yeah. 14,000 and counting. I mean, this could end right away if the United States, who hijacks the Security Council whenever they want to, and Ukraine came together and just said, if we really care about saving lives and we really care about moving forward we have no problem giving away this tiny piece that was already Russian previously until the 50s or 60s. And let's just end this now and get it over with. That's not in the interest of the West.
Or the oligarchs.
That's right.
The Ukrainian oligarchs.
That's right.
And that's why the decisive battle appears to be have transpired in Avasol steel and metallurgical works in Mariupol.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that the Azov battalion made its last stand in Azov, and having been given the chance to surrender, chose to die fighting, and were given the opportunity. But to take Mariupol was essential for them to achieve exactly that land bridge that you mentioned to their warm port. And I think that a final piece, that some non-negotiables that Russia is going to have are at least autonomy within a Ukraine for the Donbass, the Donetsk Republic, and the other one I keep forgetting, Donetsk. I just call it the Donbass because then I don't have to remember the Second People's Republic. But then that land corridor.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Luke starts with an L. The two people
Lugansk.
Republic. Lugansk, yes. Donetsk and Lugansk. Mariupol include land bridge to Crimea and recognition of Crimea's return to Russia because Khrushchev gave it away.
Return, that's very recent return. Yeah, that's right.
Early 50s. And
Khrushchev, you mentioned that in the piece.
The media
yes.
Yeah.
How is the media supposed to discuss anything serious in 3-minute bits between commercials for Pfizer's next big pill? I mean, they just the way that media is done on television in this country right now, it doesn't serve serious people in a serious manner. I think there's some, I think the industry is ill and they need to choose between their value to everyone used to be the trust of the average citizen. No one minded paying a nickel or a quarter, or even when it went up to 50 cents for the Sunday paper, because they trusted what they were going to be reading. No one minded turning on Cronkite and Mike Wallace because it used to just be a straight news show and people could make of it what they will. And if they were more interested, they could delve deeper into it as far as information exchange could take them. So I think through the Phoenix program and Mockingbird and some of the things that have become clear now about the media and security industries, mixed with the attention spans purposely being reduced to that of a gnat, and these tiny 3 to 6 minute exchanges, when we already know what everyone's going to say, I don't see how that's serving the citizenry anymore. And whether people have time to pay attention to this stuff in a meaningful way or not, Americans can smell bullshit from a mile away. And I think the current climate isn't healthy. Everybody knows it isn't healthy. So unless you're on the take, or it's just a bedtime story that makes you feel good, no one else is watching it. No one else cares about it. No one else trusts it, and it's why it's dying.
I think you put your finger on an important moment of media trust with the American public, with people like Cronkite and Mike Wallace, because back then there were three major networks and they all had a news department and sure as large a portion of the general public as possible. So they had a more legitimately earned reputation of calling balls and strikes.
Yes.
And even though the news departments were held within conglomerates oftentimes, the business leaders of the conglomerates had the common decency and the grace and the pre-Telecommunications Act responsibilities
Yeah.
to treat the news as a public trust and even a lost leader for their conglomerates as a whole.
Well,
And
and then not only that, but the specific events of the day were so important to so many people, it was generational. So if you just take the assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King, and then mix in the 67 riots where people had to see their own neighborhoods and cities burning across the country, those are images where, when they're just handled in reality and with care and concern and stoicism, that's enough to move a generation. You can buy trust for decades at a time just by being fair during events of that level of importance. I am only in my mid-40s, so I'm not old enough to remember those things in real time. I wasn't even born yet. But everybody that was important to me growing up does remember that. And that was passed over to me in a very meaningful way. So as I became a young adult and able to pay attention to those things, upon revisiting, I could see how just straight coverage of things that made people scared and cry, and then to come out of the other side of that with some kind of collective agreement of, let's get over this together, we can do it. I can see how that could create an environment that would let a spinning get out of control. I could see how the FBI and CIA could come in directly after events like that and really take advantage of it, and it being completely ignored, the game playing and chess match that was going on. I could see people setting that aside out of just strictly care and concern for what happened and what that meant for their own life at the time.
yeah, and I think one of the most important live events in post-World War II, the first most important live event in post-World War II American television was the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby.
Yeah, that's right. Sure.
Shocker that was to see that live. And that is still when the public had trust and faith with its news producers and its news broadcasters, to such an extent that there is a seminal moment in the media coverage of the Vietnam War when Walter Cronkite, for the very first time in his career as an anchor, stood up from his desk to walk over to a map of Vietnam. I think it was after the Tet Offensive, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Which was 67 or 69. And
yeah.
67, because LBJ said, I just lost the war. because the jarring nature of seeing the trusted uncle news anchor Walter Cronkite stand up from his semiotic perch of the desk
Sure.
to walk
Yeah.
to a map meant that public opinion would never be behind the war in the same way again.
Yeah.
And that was when the CIA told the media that the public still trusted the mighty Wurlitzer.
Sure.
And I believe you mentioned, I believe it was the Project Mockingbird that you mentioned, that was the operation of CIA infiltration into media. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's right. Overall, yeah, exactly. Not to be
Over
confused
many
with the Phoenix
decades. And
Project that was for Southeast Asia. That's right. Yes.
yeah, the Phoenix Project, which was a system of a program of systematic political assassinations in Vietnam.
Oh, that's
But
right. Yes.
Operation Mockingbird was the CIA's infiltration of every organ of the media in the post World War II
Mhm.
era, and this was when we still trusted the media.
Yes, that's exactly right.
But
Yeah.
the advent of Fox, and then the the wooden stake through the heart of the Telecommunications Act. With Fox Media, we see the rise of demographically targeted media programming and news programming, and it worked like a charm to gather the right wing audience, and that's when media started to be. And Matt Taibbi, as a decades-long journalist, is so wonderful to listen to for his thoughts on this evolution.
Sure.
That's when media stopped aiming at the general public as a whole and started focusing on its niche demographics.
Yeah.
And then the telecommunications made the ownership structures behind that as free and easy as the conglomerates wanted them to be. Forward 20 plus years from the Telecommunications Act and the inception and initial success of Fox, you have that long-standing intelligence infiltration of the media from Mockingbird, segmented demographic media programming, news programming now, equally involved in partnering with the media.
I would say even more so. It's gotten to the point where it's state-run media. It's literally gotten to the point where they just release whatever the White House and the security agencies say, and the retired generals that they have hired to actually appear, and they are just stenographers at this point. There's no critical thinking whatsoever. To Fox's credit, once in a while, they will actually ask a real question at a press conference. But aside from that, they are just stenographers to the security agencies and the press office. All they do is read what they're told. Any discussion outside of that will get you banned right now from everywhere. YouTube, Twitter, doesn't matter. You're not even allowed to discuss anything outside of the spectrum of what you've been told, or you're going to be labeled a naughty little boy or a naughty little girl, and we're going to stop you from playing in the sandbox. You're grounded. Go sit in the corner and be quiet.
You're right, Mark. It's no longer a question of CIA influence over the media. It's having a handful of former CIA directors as paid pundits.
Consultants, producers, yeah, absolutely.
Well, as on-air, you have several
Personalities.
former CIA
Yeah,
directors.
sure.
You have several national security advisors and deputy national advisors and the retinue of generals. So it's less manipulation from intelligence from behind. It's having actual key policy-making participants of the intelligence as on-air talent. And as we nudge past an hour and a half, we haven't even gotten to the point in my article about how big tech needs to be considered for their role in
it ties everything together. March on, complete it. Sure.
So, well, no, I propose, because we're about halfway or 2/3 of the way into my article, because we've had such a rich discussion of the issues and historical along with it. But I would propose that we bring this to a close, having looked at the evolution of the media's involvement with intelligence to the point where they're on-air talent. And then we could pick up on this same article in our next foray together.
That makes sense to bring it
and look at how big
into modern times with the tech firms. Absolutely.
Yeah, because
that is the new Cronkite. That is the new Wallace. That is
because Facebook had to amend some of their user rules to let Ukrainians let Ukrainians whip Americans into the bloodlust that we're witnessing today. So
it makes sense to me. We'll wrap up the article in another show in another segment. Certainly.
I think that sounds like a good episode 3 of the Hardline, according to Stonefruit, with Mark French. All right.
And Boyce Brown.
And Boyce Brown. Can't be anonymous forever, but all of the links will be in. Has promised to do some writing himself, and maybe we'll get him to Substack with fellow corporate refugees like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi and Breaking Points, Crystal and Sagar. But wherever you publish, I know it's going to be written for your readers, Mark, and we'll speak to our...
Have a great day.
Bye. Thanks for joining us on the second edition of the Hardline, according to
the Stonefruit. All right.
Are we clear? Not quite. In stream. Click.